Oh. All right, we did it. Good job. Welcome to Tuesday night, guys. Glad you're here. I'm really glad you're here, right? I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad you guys are here. It's a big deal that you're here, right? The early church started with less people than this. I mean, that's an exciting thing to see. After all the sermons we're talking about, all the talking about being sent out and being able to share the gospel, you guys are here to be equipped. That's a good thing. Some of you are online doing that as well. That's awesome. Just touch the TV. We're like, hello. No, I'm just kidding. But, we're glad you're here. This is an interesting time of year where everyone starts to hibernate a little bit. We have like things going on. We all kind of hibernate, and that's normal. But there's opportunities, and if you feel at all, I guess here's what I want to say. I've laid on a bit of guilt the last couple sermons. Not to be mean. Guilt's a terrible motivator long term, all right? But there's moments where there's a recognition like, wait, I'm responsible to share the gospel with people. And so that's not meant to make you feel bad. But what I will say is this. If you've ever, tried to think through your life, you think of your life, I mentioned this, like the Lego slot part of your life, like how you organize your life. The challenge is if you don't have a time in your life where you schedule going to the dentist, like ever, then you just aren't going to be like, I think I should go to the dentist today. Like you have to actually have an alarm or something that tells you to go to the dentist, whatever, once or twice a year, however many times you're supposed to go. Like there's something, or else you just won't do it. And I think evangelism is like a muscle that's very similar to that. Some people, they wake up in the morning and they're just evangelistic, right? And so you might see that, and that's akin to listening to someone with a good voice singing. They just wake up and they sing well. Okay, so it's fine, but we're still supposed to all sing. And for many of us, we don't have, I remember when I first started being, as a pastor full time, I noticed that within like a year, all my friendships and my social groups and my social settings, I was with Christians. Like immediately I was with Christians all the time. And so to speak to non-Christians became like this giant planned, I'd meet the first non-Christian I talked to, you're in the elevator, like, do you know Jesus Christ? Like you're just, right? You're like, I'm talking to a non-believer today, like pray for me in my work. There's it's like, that's great. So on the one hand, I mentioned on Sunday that we want to imagine ourselves like lit up and we're lighting the sticks around us kind of thing, right? But I would say that if you're in your life, you want to have an environment that you're in that gives you opportunity to share the gospel, not just with your friends and family, but that's something that's a regular occurrence, okay? And so there's events like these. So we have Christmas caroling coming up. It's Balboa Park at 2 p.m. By the way, isn't this really pretty? We were having a debate when we were eating here. You guys are all invited, by the way. If you want to come early and just bring food, we won't provide it, but you just eat here and hang out. There's people here. We were wondering who wrote this, right? Because this is Pastor Scott's announcement, but we're like, did his wife Libby write it? Because look at how pretty it is. And so we went back on the cameras and saw, no, Pastor Scott did come here in his flight suit and wrote all this on the board and sat back to admire his work. And so good job, Pastor Scott. Look at the detail on the mistletoe or whatever it is. Like, this is pretty good. So anyways, this is his announcement for us and his great caroling. It's gorgeous. Even his handwriting, like, Scott, man. Balboa Park at 2 p.m. this Sunday, the color coordination, I'm impressed. Meet on the grass outside the visitor center. Wow. Evangelism tracts and caroling fellowship. Evangelism tracts like these ones will be given out. So you could give out tracts while there's caroling, and then you could talk to Pastor Scott. Like, this is a great announcement, Pastor Scott. That's great. So, if you want to be part of caroling, if you have nothing in your life where you're sharing the gospel, that's fine. You can work on fixing it, right? But in the meantime, go to stuff like this, 100%. Because it'll give you a chance to at least go out there. You just never know what God's going to do with the opportunities he presents in front of you. Does that make sense? Like, he's going to use it. His word never comes back void. And so we won't always see how he uses this side of heaven. Like, we'll see a lot of this when we get to heaven, right? That'll be awesome. And sometimes God lets us see fruit this side of heaven, which is always rad. But I would say to you, if you don't have something in your life where you're regularly exposed and given the opportunity, and you're taking the opportunity on a regular basis to share the gospel, we'll look for something that gives you that opportunity. So it could be something like, I play pickleball at the same time every day with the group, and I share the gospel there. So like surfing's a rough one. It's pretty hard. I mean, you can say surfing is my outreach, but you usually don't talk to people surfing. If you do, you're usually an annoying person. So if you're padding up to someone in the lineup, hey, how's your faith? Like, it's great, I got to get the wave. Like, it's not the best environment, right? But being in an environment helps. So I know for me at that time, that's why one of the reasons I went to start training jiu-jitsu, because I was around a bunch of non-believers. And eventually just be in the same environment, people talk to you. And sometimes they talk to you at awkward times. I mentioned before, I put a mouthpiece in, I got a tooth knocked out at one point, so I realized I got to start wearing a mouthpiece because my dentist said so. So I wear a mouthpiece. So you put your mouthpiece in, and I have a tattoo, and it says, I am Barabbas or whatever. And someone says, I'm a bad ASS or whatever. Like, what? That's your tattoo? And I'm like, no, it says, I am Barabbas. And so we're about to roll. We like fist bump. We're about to like spar. He's like, well, who's Barabbas? And so I'm about to spar some guy, and I got a mouthpiece. So I take out spits flying. I'm like, you're Barabbas, the guy on the cross, and we're supposed to fight. And so then I tackle the guy, basically, and I'm holding him out. So let me tell you more about this guy. And we're just talking. We're talking all about it, And people show up to church. And so that's my, now, is there other areas where I share the gospel? Absolutely. But it's nice knowing that I have a scheduled time. By the way, here's a tip, men that are married. Schedule 30 minutes a week where you're going to focus on a way to make your wife happy. You don't actually have to spend that 3 minutes with them, but since where an alarm goes off, you're like, here's the thing where you can plan something, or I'll think about them, or I'll do something. It's usually really nice. It's not even about doing the thing. It's about taking the time to put in your schedule, right? Evangelism is like that. So again, go to this. This is not just to sell the caroling, but it's like if you hear the sermon I was talking about Sunday, all about like our impact and sharing the gospel, it's on you. It's you guys that are going to do it. So this new facility, again, you're going to fill it up, not me. My job is to tell you and get you pumped up, and then you guys fill it up. And so if it doesn't fill up, it's your fault, not mine, because I'm doing my job as best I can, and it's on you. So when the church first started, we had 6 people. Bryant was one of them, maybe a little bit more, it got group, but Bryant was one of them. I said to this group of people I'm spending time with, I said, hey, I'm spending time with you guys. Isn't that great? They're like, yeah. I'm like, you know what I'm not doing? Running around trying to meet new people right now. I'm spending time with y'all. I'm like, right, that's great. I'm like, right, so if you don't reproduce, then we're dead in the water. See you tomorrow. And they reproduced. And that's what I'm saying to you guys. That's what this means. The mission means that you make making disciples. Like, you're reaching people, you're talking to them, you're investing in them, and you're doing it. And you guys are doing a great job. You're doing it. But keep that in mind. Keep that ownership in mind. Let me say a prayer before we get into our book. God, bless the teaching tonight. Give me wisdom to teach well. Help us to enjoy the privilege we have to learn these things. Help us to worship you with our minds as we learn these things, and help us to appreciate this moment in history you've given us with education and how much your word has impacted that. And we just praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So this book we're going through again, it's the book that made our world, and it's how the Bible created the soul of the Western civilization. And this is so relevant, obviously, right now, as we're seeing Western civilization under attack at every turn. And the idea that Western civilization is under attack at every turn is something that you can see in virtually every institution. Since the 60s in particular, we've seen folks that are essentially Marxists infiltrate almost every institution and bureaucracy in this nation, whether it's media, whether it's universities. Now we have the ESG stuff for the publicly traded companies. We have the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff in the universities, which is a job that didn't even exist before. Now it's like millions of dollars every university is spending on it. You could see this in every job site you go to. One of my daughters works at a restaurant. They had to go to training to learn all about pronouns. And it says false things. If you use the wrong pronoun, you could be sued. And I'm like, give me a break. Are you kidding me? We live in America. I'll sue back. Like, kidding me? Like, I just hate dumb threats. Anyways, but I bring all this up to say the soul of the Western civilization, the presuppositions that built the West are under attack. And so that might look like politics. It might look like culture wars, right? And that's not the case. Remember, politics and culture wars are debates about theology, right? That's the thing. Now, the Christian has to remember that we don't live in a theocracy. So our job isn't to win the culture war through argumentation. In other words, let me rephrase this. When we think about culture wars, when we think about politics, our goal isn't to make an argument where we're like, well, if we get into power, then we're going to force everyone to go to church. It's the law. You have to go to church. Now, that's not what any of us desire. That's what the Catholic Church does in history. Like, that was the Christians' view in history when we're going to make the Roman Empire the Holy Roman Empire, and we're going to make it like heresy if you don't go, and then the state and the church are going to blend. Our job and desire is not to blend the church with the state. We want to be separate to protect the church and the gospel. However, like I've said before, the state does transform and society does transform as a byproduct of disciple making. So as we make disciples and churches train disciples up, then what comes from that is societal change, at least in our initial circles. Right? So you see like an impact of that. So we talked about that last week, talked about Wesley, right? And how he changed, the soul of the West, Whitefield, these guys, like their impact on the culture that we saw. Now, this is our time at bat, So when you look at the politics and the culture wars, the way you change those is by raising your kids Christian. One of the things that's been a tragedy, and again, if someone's watching this and this is you, I'm not dissing you, okay? I'm not saying your names. Okay? I'm just kidding. But one of the things I saw when I first became a pastor, excuse me, is what's called the kindergarchy, or what we call the kindergarchy. It's that I'm going to go to church where my children, my kindergartners in this case, my kindergartners like this church because they have a good kids thing, or my kids, and that's fine. But we want to go to churches where our children, in first case, where our family knows the word and it's educated, because that's the primary thing. Now, there's lots of good churches. You could go to another church because you like it and it's great. But if the whole reason is, well, I heard they have a jump house at that place, I'm going to go there, right? If that's your reasoning, we're missing out on the disciple-making process. So the goal isn't just to show up at this institution, but to grow in it, to become more like Christ. And the benefit of that is that it impacts culture around us. But you're going against the grain, right? So that's kind of my point. You go against the grain. Now, the impact of that is how do we live consistently in a culture that's starting to go against us? Meaning like your viewpoints and what you hold to be ethical, what you hold to be normative ethics is at odds now, increasingly, to every institution that exists. Now, it's not totally over, and you could say, well, the way we fix it is we start seeding Christians in these. That's true, that will turn things around, and so we have the option of trying to I want to get everyone fired except for Christians. Like, that's one way I guess you could approach it, but the other way is we need to be good witnesses for the gospel and watch. The gospel is more subversive than that. It makes its impact in that. Right now, education and medicine and compassion, I think, is let me go to this next one here. Yeah, hospitals. All right. So when we talk about compassion, last time, education, what's interesting to me is when you think about healthcare, and that's kind of where we're going to get to, we just went through a debate. This book is old, all right? This book is prior to 2011. I mean, we're talking old, all right? Why is that important? Well, because what was raging during coming into 2008? Debates about healthcare. Obamacare. We've gotten used to Obamacare, and then the debates were, well, what about this country? They have it great in Sweden, don't they? Or let's get healthcare like Canada. And Christians think, well, what does that have to do with Christianity? What does that have to do with the gospel, right? And what's challenging is you'll have politicians say Jesus would help the poor. And what's true is he does and he did, and the gospel does point to those things, but we forget that hospitals, when you look at the very notion of them, and the very idea that we're going to help people and do this is a Christian idea. And so the idea that we're going to have secular ideology, that we're going to say we're going to have hospitals and we need to do it because we have to help the poor because that's what Jesus would do. We're okay, that's what Jesus would do. Then are we also allowed to say that we're going to oppose abortion? You don't get to have it both ways. You can't play the Jesus card in the culture but we get to. We have to understand the roots of this. So Christians are the ones, we are not the rubes that are saying whatever, we're the ones that have a heritage that built hospitals. Radical Christianity has built hospitals all around the world. This is something that we do. We care for people. But why? Is this it comes from our love and truth and knowing the word. So Christians started all the universities. Christians started all the hospitals. That's an amazing thing. You see a tiny bit of the two worldview exchange right now with the whole Gaza stuff with Hamas and Israel, right? Hamas is constantly a destructive element. They have no plan on how to take care of anybody. Their whole existence is the destruction of Israel. That's why they exist. There's nothing in their charter that has them taking care of anyone. They're not ashamed of it either. Yes, we need gasoline down here so we can fight. We don't care about our people. They don't care. And that's baffling to us. But the worldview is that. Whereas Israel, though they're not Christian in any way, their worldview is a better worldview. At least they build. Does that make sense? So the best worldview is the Christian one. Let's go into it. So we're talking about hospitals and this thing. One last thing before we get into it. Whenever you drive around and you see an ambulance, you see that picture of the staff with the serpent on it. You guys know what that picture is? That comes from the Bible. So ambulances everywhere have little things on the back of window that comes from the Bible. The staff and the serpent, remember in the book of Numbers, I believe, and you go through, the Israelites are getting bit by poisonous snakes, and God says, make a bronze serpent and put it up on a pole, and when you look at the serpent, you'll be healed. And so that's a good sign for medicine. So on the back of every ambulance is a picture of a bronze serpent on a pole. Isn't that interesting? So you go, and when you go to hospitals, that's the picture on the thing. That's the bronze serpent on the pole. Now, in the picture of the Bible, the point is you're supposed to see your sin, and Jesus compares himself to that serpent on the pole lifted up just in the same way, which is you see, wow, that's what my sin costs. But it's ironic how we take these symbols and divorce them from their actual meaning. But I digress. Let's go into it. So he says, we're driving 60 miles an hour through downtown Minneapolis on the interstate when we heard loud sirens behind us. The high-speed traffic came to a screeching halt. 2 ambulances and a few police vehicles sped by us. Before we had an inkling of what was going on, tears welled up in Ruth's eyes. Remember, they're from India. She says, what have I done now? I asked. And she says, how much they care for their people, Ruth said, ignoring me and trying to see if beyond the traffic there was an accident and if someone had been hurt. That was the year 2000. We'd just come to America to write this book and to explore the possibility of making a television program. This was not Ruth's first trip to America. She had studied here for 3 years, 1971 to 74, and the culture shock was still potent. Even today, Ruth sheds a tear or two when she sees traffic stop at the sight of a flashing school bus picking up or dropping off a child. It brings back memories of her ordeal in New Delhi when every day an adult family member had to help our youngest daughter get onto the school bus without coming under its wheels or getting hit by a speeding scooter. Having been the beneficiary of the kindness and thoughtfulness of hundreds of people in America, Ruth has become America's unashamed apologist. Sometimes this gets her into controversies, so on and so forth. But let me just go back a step. One thing that's interesting, when we were doing the COVID and the BLM riots happened, there's people on the freeway marching. And the cops had to turn us around, and we see this is not how this disruptive, like sort of protest mob, it's mob mentalities, is kind of, we've had protests in our lives, but nothing like we've seen in this new culture. I mean, I think in 2008 when Obama became president, remember his job prior to becoming president was a community organizer. Do you know what that is? That's a guy that gets mobs together. And so now you see as part of kind of like our political culture, mobs working all the time. Like mobs, just like violent, angry mobs. And again, if you take the Marxist view, if you're in an oppressed class, you can be as violent as you want. Your rhetoric can be whatever. And so you can, it's a mostly peaceful protest when you're burning down homes and looting stores. But the point about this mob idea, and you come into it, what do we see? When you see people swarming, if you can watch, go on YouTube. During the COVID and when they had the BLM riots, people were swarming cars and beating the windows of the cars. And what do all of us say? Drive through it. You look at the comments, drive through it. Right now, so why would we say that? Because people are standing in front of cars, right? So what's happening with the mob mentality is it's taking advantage of the naturally inbuilt American compassion that we have. No one's doing mobs like that in India. People will run you right over. But they won't here. And I'm not advocating that they should run you over, but it's taking advantage of the fact that you won't, right? So we're going to beat the car down until I get what I want. What this book is getting to is like, as we start seeing a culture that's less and less has that real like interaction where we actually care for people and you see people kind of capitalizing more, our natural instinct is to go against it the same way where you hear the people in the comments, well, I would just drive them over. And then you see the opposite side in COVID, oh, you didn't take the vaccine? Well, I wouldn't even help you, right? And you just start to see that kind of come up. But this is not how we started. This is not who we are as a nation. This is that Marxism that comes in. So he goes on a few such occasions, he talks about the debates and whatnot, but he goes, in much of the Christian community in India, it lacks the spirit of services of the personal, non-institutional level as we experience it in America. So what they're saying is in India, there's not a spirit of service at a personal or non-institutional level. In other words, countries all around the world have institutional benevolence, right? Why? Because that's a straight up Marxist ideology, right? But the idea that we have individuals who will stand out and reach out to help people is a great thing. But again, you can only hit that so many times before you start to fade. Like, for example, how many of you guys prior to COVID were totally cool tipping people and now find yourself a little bit antagonistic about being asked to tip everywhere you go? Like if you go, we were at Shake Shack the other day. All right. So on Sundays, I go to UTC Mall to eat now because there's all the food there. I like the mall. It's near where the new church is going to be. And I go play soccer. You're all invited. But we went to Shake Shack. And at Shake Shack, you could go in line or you can order from a kiosk. And at the kiosk, it asks if you want a tip. I mean, and you're still like looking around to say no. And so lately I'm trying to get the gumption to say like, look, if I have to go to the counter to do it, I'm trying to say today's the day. And I just tipped someone today though. I couldn't help it because they're standing there looking at you. And it makes you start to resent it a little bit, right? So when you take advantage of benevolence, when you take advantage of kindness, you start to like make people push back against that, right? So, when people start using Kickstarter campaigns just to get their thing out, you start to become jaded and cynical. And so we're in a moment right now where all the natural sort of like good qualities that we have in our culture that came from this Christian underpinning that we are starting to deny as a culture, well, people are still taking advantage of the natural sort of like romantic notion, the warmth that's left over after the coals are gone, taking advantage of it, and it's creating cynicism. And that's where we're at today. And I just kind of want to make sure we don't miss that. But he goes on, he says, that's the idea at personal, non-institutional levels of benevolence is unique to America. Now, it's going to become less unique. When we think of benevolence merely as government handouts, we're in such big trouble, right? Karl Marx believed that religion is the opiate that the elite administer to the masses to keep them from revolting against oppression and exploitation. This is Marx's view, right? So the religion is the opiate. So in other words, religion is an oppressor. That's Marx's view. Religion is an oppressor. Okay, and so we got to revolt against that. But on the flip side, you have another critic of Christianity. This would be Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche he does not like Christianity. He's anti-Christian. Okay, he's antichrist. He's not like Christianity. But his critique is interesting because even Nietzsche, who disagrees with Marx, says it this way. He says Judaism, according to Nietzsche, this is a guy who's not for Christianity. Judaism began under Moses as a slaves' revolt against their Egyptian masters. So how stupid is it to say, like when someone tells you like the Da Vinci Code, if you read the Da Vinci Code, none of you even know that, you're already too young. But when I was a pastor, Da Vinci Code came out. And I was like, Dan Brown wrote this great book. It's great. And what's his main thing? The church has been trying to control society. Like, it's such a stupid argument. It's not even interesting. It's just really stupid. It's so stupid. Like, and we're like, well, makes sense. And we say, well, I'm against the Da Vinci Code. And we start talking about, well, it's just fiction. Why are you against it? Anyways, we're having a Da Vinci Code Bible study later. You're like, you can't have it both ways. Same thing happens with this. Nietzsche is disagreeing with the stupidness of Marx's stain. Just because it's Karl Marx, what do you say? He's saying something dumb, right? Christianity is not to keep people from revolting against exploitation. It literally started as a revolt, Judaism, from Pharaoh, by God bringing them out of Egypt. Right? I mean, that's kind of the picture. Christianity, likewise, was a religion of a weak and crucified Galilean. Jesus was born in the shadow of Herod's temple. Right? So that's kind of the picture here. It appealed to the downtrodden of the Roman Empire, women, slaves, outcasts, and the defeated. Nietzsche noted that Christianity enabled the weak to overthrow the classical civilization that celebrated strength, sensuality, and a tough-minded acceptance of death, for example, in things like the gladiator games. Right? So Christianity overthrew the Roman Empire in some sense, right? So how does that happen? And again, not like in Islam, which comes through the sword, but through its philosophy, its ideology, right? And it built the West. According to Nietzsche, the Judeo-Christian tradition was a means by which the powerless enchained the powerful by manipulating guilt, requiring benevolence, and suppressing natural vitality. So both Nietzsche and Marx are against the church. Marx is against the church because he thinks it's part of the oppressor class. Nietzsche's against the church because it's actually trying to make you benevolent and so actually oppressing you by making you less wild and free. But both of them see the church as an oppression. Nietzsche is oppressing the natural sort of animalistic man that really gives you freedom. Marx says it's oppressing you as an institution of the powerful. But both of them are against the church in some way. Isn't that interesting? Let me just say this. One of the things that I can tell you from this book that I want us to see, and it's just like my main enemy, if you will, that I've found after reading this book. Every book I'm like, what's the lesson the one lesson I get from this book is like casual, unadorned, that's the right word. It's like casual sort of like, I'm trying to find the nicest way to say this. Nominal churches that focus only on nominal things to create nominal Christians are the worst. Can I say it that way? If you're passionate and you want to speak the truth, it should matter, right? If Nietzsche and Marx think the church matters, and we as evangelicals, what even does that mean? Right? We as evangelicals make the church like just a thing. Like the pastor's got to dress in a football jersey to get you to come. We're going to make 15-minute services so you get to the game. Like, it's such an insult. The world's like the church really matters. We got to oppose it. Christians are like, football. When I first became a pastor, I never watched football. Football's great. You can watch football, you're fine. But the first year of our church, when football season started, I did not like it. Because I noticed a percentage of the church not at church. All of a sudden, I've gotten over it. I get it. You have lives. I get that. Oh, man. But even when opponents recognize that Christianity is the thing they have to oppose, and the Christians decide that we're going to be so derivative that we're going to do an at the movies series all the time, and they're like doing this thing, it's such It's such an insult. Like the one people that are supposed to stand up in these things, you're like, hey, here's the bad guys. You start a movie, you show the bad guys, right? And you show the good guys, and it's like, doop-doo-doo. That's not a fun movie. Like, come on, guys. So that gets me. So Nietzsche and them are both against the church in every way. So Nietzsche strongly influenced those advocating Aryan supremacy. Why? Like, so he said Judeo-Christian basically suppressed our strength. And so Aryan nationality, he went against this. The Nazis acted on his argument that the modern decadence, that is the ideas of equality, emancipation of women, democracy, and so forth, came from the Jews and Christians. So they opposed Christianity. When you look at the anti-Semitism of today, do you think it's based on the secular state of Israel? Now, even though Israel and the Jews in Israel are largely secular, and the Jews that follow any sort of Judaism are really just rabbinic, and they need Jesus, it is the very notion of their religious underpinning that people hate them. Do you think like the wanting to wipe them off the map because of their occupation? If you actually look at a map of the Middle East, like look at a map of the Middle East, to say Israel is an occupier is the most asinine thing. And it only comes from an agenda-driven, propaganda-driven, it's just idiotic. It's just idiotic. You look at a map, and here's a map, and you have, and let me just show you. I won't even draw a map, but I'm gonna draw a map. Okay, let me just draw a map so you don't miss it. You could see the Middle East, and I don't even have a pen. This is good. Oh, here we go. Here's basically the Middle East, okay? So we'll say here's the Middle East. There's all this land, Mediterranean, so you got all this land, and it's like this. That's Israel. Like literally, this is all Muslim, Islamic, all of it. And it's expanding. They're like, that's an occupation. Are you kidding me? Just to argue that, like, why would you be so against that? Now, you could say, oh, it's because that land's really special. Is it about the land? Like, when someone tries to make the issue a secular issue, not a religious one, now the problem is both are non-believing people, but it's their allegiance to this kind of religious Judeo-Christian viewpoint. And that's what Nietzsche and Marx recognize. And that's why Nietzsche and Marx and the people that are kind of like the white liberal elites in our nation right now are siding with Hamas against Israel. Why? Because they're against ultimately not just Judaism, but Christianity. They get lumped into Western power because we say Judeo-Christian. Nietzsche strongly influenced those advocating Aryan supremacy. These had the gospel preached to the poor and the base, leading to the general revolt of all the downtrodden, the wretched, the failure, and less favored against the race. In other words, Christianity, according to Nietzsche and Hitler and the rest, Christianity made nations weak. That was the argument. So they had to purge the church. Right? This point of view summarizes a striking contrast between Judeo-Christian egalitarianism and the Hindu Aryan strategy of organizing society hierarchically, hierarchically based on biological breeding, with the Brahmins on top and the untouchables at the bottom. So, for example, Margaret Sanger was a Malthusian eugenicist. She loved Hitler. She's the lady that started Planned Parenthood. And so she thought, she was a big fan. And so her whole thing is they started Planned Parenthood, first started in the inner cities, to basically make it so that young black couples she went to jail to sterilize the uterus of women without them knowing, black women, because she thought they were an inferior race. It was pure, good old-fashioned racism. That's how Planned Parenthood started. This is not me. There's a whole book, this is a basic thing. And so when you go in, you learn about the great people. McDonald's used to have that mural on the wall. If you ever eat at this place called McDonald's, you ever eat there? On the wall, they used to have murals that had Gandhi and Margaret Sanger. How would Margaret Sanger get on this wall? You know what I'm saying? This woman was pro the murder. She's anti-Semite, murder, racist, Malthusian eugenicist. That's where she comes from. This all came, and they're all against Christianity. Nietzsche was not alone in condemning Christian compassion. They're condemning Christian compassion, right? Many Hindus cannot believe that the poor are not victims of their own karma and that God cares for the poor. They cannot understand why the West gives so much charity to serve the poor and destitute in India. Now, let me move away from the poor for a moment and just get you the idea that we love our enemies. So during COVID, this is a big one, right? You could understand why an atheistic worldview would say, and we heard it, and there's people in your families, and there's people that came to this church that wrote to me that no longer come to this church, and some, that would say things like, well, if someone doesn't get the vaccine, hospitals shouldn't even care for them. So let me get this straight. We think we should open our border up and let people illegally come here and give them anything they want to break our laws, but if someone doesn't get a vaccine that you think they should get, hospitals should turn them away. Why? Because they made their choice. They get what they deserve. Imagine if we did that with medicine. Your liver is damaged. Why? Well, you've been drinking a lot. Poo on you. Have a good day. We only serve righteous people at this hospital. Think about all the heart problems people have by making terrible health choices. Well, that's what you get. Anyways, we're looking for a righteous, healthy person to help. Like, the whole medical establishment is built on the idea that you make stupid choices for your health. Yes, it's true that sometimes you do nothing wrong and something goes wrong with your health. Well, I guess they'd let you into the righteous hospital, I guess. But for most of us, you make bad health choices. And guess what? The doctor's job is not to tell you. Nah, he can say, hey, you should stop doing this thing. You're like, I should, shouldn't I? But I didn't come here to have you tell me that. Fix it. I don't like it. You don't like it, whatever. But that's it. We help people when they do that. Oh, this is what happens when people get in harm. We help them because they're made in God's image, and that's the basic philosophy of it. But if we lose the Christian philosophy, you start to not help people. This is one of the reasons why you look like in Canada right now. So on the one hand, you used to have eugenics that came from birth, and now you see eugenics that comes at death when people are old, right? So what's happening is when we let the government decide healthcare, what we're doing is letting the government decide profits for who's going to be cared for. So if your healthcare is free, provided by the government, well, guess who the bottom line starts to come down to? It's exactly what happened during COVID. Well, since we all share resources, because you didn't take the vaccine, you're taking the resources from people that did take the vaccine who should get care. That was the argument made by politicians and people on the news. Literally, the argument was, you put too much strain on the system by not following the rhetoric that we want. What happens when you look at people that get old and you realize keeping someone alive at a certain age just really isn't? So, hey, I'm coming in, I found out I have a lump in a weird spot, and you're in your 70s or your 80s, and they're like, yeah, our recommendation is that you really consider. All of a sudden there's an agenda and a motive when the bottom line becomes not you as an individual mattering, but now we're saying we're a collective. We got to help them. Does that make sense? It matters that you have the actual, that you as an individual matter. But when you get into this collective Marxist ideology in the hospital systems don't look very good anymore. Again, they deeply suspect that Western, so Nietzsche and the Hindus and whatnot, deeply suspect Western philanthropy and dislike the fact that Christians deliberately choose to serve, educate, and empower lower castes and the marginalized. This was an underlying factor behind the Hindu enthusiasm for Dr. Arun Shuri's attack on Christian missions. Some Hindus believe that Christians serve the poor to prepare them for colonization by America. In other words, they say, the Christians are coming to help you and make you fit so you'll like them so America can come colonize us. But be that as it may, Nietzsche's critique was correct that the Bible has been the greatest humanizing force in history. What he just said, humanizing is a big deal. Humanizing, giving value to people. The Bible has done that. It drove the movement for the abolition of slavery and promoted care for the weak, such as widows, orphans, the handicapped, and leprosy patients. This is Christianity did this. It's from liberating and rehabilitating temple prostitutes to reforming prisons and bringing sanity and morality to wars. The biblical tradition has been the most powerful civilizing force. Period. Why we would be embarrassed by that in any way or say, oh no, this one gets me all the time. When someone talks about, well, that's politics. Your religion doesn't belong in politics. That is the one place religion belongs more than any one other place. Because religion is all about your worldview. And so if you say, well, it's not, I'm just going to accept this other one, what you're saying is, I like another religion, and Christianity is not allowed to come in and have a say. But everyone has a worldview. What's it based on if it's not the Bible? Where do you get your ethics from? And if you say you don't want religion to come in, stop telling us what we ought to do and should do, because who are you to say that to me? You can't have it both ways. In any case, today's secular ideology has taken over institutions like the Red Cross. Commercial interest has captured practices like nursing care. New Age groups have become champions of the prevention of cruelty to animals, and historians have forgotten the origin of human rights and the justification of civil disobedience. I mean, we can say the same thing about environmentalism. We can say the same thing about each of these things. Secular ideology, that is an ideology that denies Christ, is foolishness. What does it Romans say? Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God and for what? Animals and creeping things, right? So this is kind of the exchange that happens in those environments. So what happens in each of these places, the Red Cross and New Age groups, I mentioned, again, Salvation Army. You go into Salvation Army right now and say, hey, someone tell me the gospel. What? They might even kick you out for wanting to hear about the gospel. Or if you go preach in a Salvation Army. There's a church. There's actually still Salvation Army churches, by the way. But the very fact that you might be surprised by that shows you how much the tails wag the dog. Originally, though, these were all expressions of what the Bible calls the fruit of the Spirit. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These efforts and institutions are the outworking of the Spirit that Jesus promised to those who believe in him. In other words, the outworking of this is what? If you want to start a law practice to help people that are unjustly, want to start a law practice to help people that are unjustly condemned by the law. I'm going to help this. I'm going to start a new thing that does, great, start it. Just because it's not gospel doesn't mean you don't do it because people are made in God's image. We should help them out, right? So this is kind of like the picture that we see. But a survey of the history of medical profession confirms the assertion of macro historian David Land is that culture makes almost all the difference. Greek, Roman, Indian, and Islamic civilization produced great physicians. Hear me out carefully. They all produced great physicians and surgeons. However, they did not develop modern medicine, partly because they could not create caring cultures. Our culture is becoming less and less every day a caring culture. Our culture is marked more and more by cruelty, and yet we are still the greatest nation on God's green earth. This is what's the West, as we know it, is a special place, and it's going away, not just because stupid people come into positions of power subversively, but because we just can't be bothered to care. And so we become less and less of a caring culture. Think about that. For that reason, over time, these other cultures lost their technical expertise. So you have the best surgeons, the best doctors, they lost their technical expertise and their advantage of a head start in medicine to biblical civilization. Like the countries that are moving towards Western, like the West as we know it, is left Western Europe. Western Europe is a destitute place. Western Europe is now into Eastern Europe. It moved east. And the West intended to reflect the image of a triune God, be a community of love, but it chose to follow the diabolical temptation to put self-interest first. In the classical Greco-Roman world, medicine had a promising beginning, but it did not become a self-sustaining, ever-improving science. Like it did not at all. Medical students are familiar with the Hippocratic tradition in Greece, right? This first recorded practice of rational medicine relied upon critical questioning, right? It encouraged rationality over ruling superstitions, magic, and rituals. Think about this idea, the Hippocratic tradition, like, hey, so why am I sick? They're like, oh, someone had the evil eye in your village. So what should we do? Well, if we just pluck their eye out, maybe you'll get better. Well, let's try it. See what happens. Like, what's that like? Hey, we heard there's some witches in here. Well, I know. Let's try to drown them and see if we all get better. Because our calves haven't been birthing. We could go back to that. People want to go back to that. You could go right now to a person that will put, hey, what supplements should you take? Well, here, just lay on the counter here. I'm going to put the supplements on top of your belly, and we're going to see the aura that comes from it. Maybe they'll give you good supplements because you need vitamin D or something, but I'm like, you can do that. You go to a witch doctor, and we do that simply because the normal doctors are becoming so stupid too. But anyways, did you know that they just made ivermectin cool now? I'm waiting for an apology from all the people that were so snotty about it. That's horse medicine. I'm like, is anyone apologize? Like, if you're one of the people watching this that like had disdain for ivermectin, it's time to like own up to your stupidity. Now the medicine says like, ivermectin's good. It's been good all along. Like, they just waited till you forgot about it. We moved on. I'm not going to move on. If you're one of those people that dissed people about ivermectin, I want to hear a public apology or guess what? Repent, man. Like you slandered a ton of people. You were an idiot. Like that was wrong. And you've been shown to be wrong. You're going to move on about it? Are we going to do that? Because so now, remember when Joe Rogan was talking about ivermectin? And so when COVID happened, we had a thing. We got some ivermectin. You know how we had to do it? We had to go in the black market. We had to talk to a doctor from somewhere. It's like sneaky. It's like, hey, you want some ivermectin? Like, I got it. It's like right here. Like, why? Because the medical establishment at that time became so politicized that but now we're like, no, it's cool. Ivermectin's cool. We could use it again. I just want to bring it up so you realize no one's apologizing. And so what does that mean? It's like when you see someone write an article in a newspaper, this happens all the time. How many of you have ever seen a movie about something you do? Okay, how many of you, some of you guys are soldiers here, right? How many of you have ever, let me use an example. So you shoot guns and you're in a movie and they say, oh, I took the assault rifle. Who calls it that except for TV, right? You're like, that's not true, right? So you see that and you realize that they got that wrong. You realize helicopters don't turn upside down. Like you see how stupid that is, right? But then in subjects you don't know, we just assume that it's not lying to you just the same. Like, if you know when they talk about what you do with such idiocy, why do we think that they're so right when they talk about stuff you don't know? Like, anyways, it should just give you like some, anyways. So the Hippocratic Oath got people, encouraged rationality, or overruled superstitions, magic rituals. By the way, now that we've lost our Western tradition, all those superstitions are coming back. Right? The Hippocratic tradition introduced professionalism and ethical standards to medical practice, which again are being undermined by making everything political. This happened in Russia. This happened in all these places. A physician was required to respect patients, not abuse the power he had over their bodies, maintain confidentiality, and give life, not take it. Again, all these things are being put back. At one point, we had to go to the doctor, and one of our daughters, teenager, the doctor, we said, hey, about the COVID shot, like, why should my teen take it? We'd love to hear some data. Like, do you have any data for why we should take it or not? Like, we want to let them like make the case to us. And the person's like, well, all I can say is the other day we had a teen in here. And I'm like, so you have an opportunity to give us data and you choose an anecdote. And my wife told me about that. And I'm like, I raged. I'm like, you're getting propaganda from the one place that's supposed to be above that. Like, the Hippocratic Oath included caring for the unborn. Therefore, it banned abortion. Now that's considered women's health care. Listen, you know why we call it women's health care? Because someone got together and they said, you know what, we need a marketing team said we need to create a political correct way to describe the murder of babies in the womb, the most helpless people in our society. We should create a new thing. We're going to call this women's health. What about when we talk about transgender surgeries for children? What is that? That is someone that's literally mutilating the bodies of children and giving them sex-changing hormones before they even have the ability to decide like anything about their life. They don't even know what they should eat for dinner. And we're going to be like, we're going to let this kid tell a teacher, and then we're going to go and have them change all these hormones. And so, we don't call that child abuse, which is what it is. You know what we call it instead? Gender-affirming care. So what happens? These people are going against gender-affirming care. They want, like, that sounds pretty bad. And only because we're stupid, we're like, oh man, that really sounds bad. I'm not against gender-affirming care. I want to affirm gender. Like, that's where we live right now. And it's so hard. So the first summary of the Hippocratic Oath was first, do no harm. The entire medical establishment got behind lockdowns. We know for a fact they don't work. There's people that are going to advocate for them even still. Do no harm. Well, does lockdown stop COVID? Maybe. It did not, by the way. But you know what it did do? It did a lot of harm. Suicide rates went up, like majorly. A lot of health issues go up. So like, do you think this is a wise thing for the medical establishment to be like, we're going to weigh in on this, do no harm? Like, this all changed. Like, everything's shifting so fast, right? The Greeks thus made the first commendable start in medicine, but they could not build upon the wonderful foundation. Today, in almost every town in India, we have Unani Dawakhanas, Greek medical houses. Mostly Muslims run these, indicating that Islam brought Greek medicine to India. They dispense Greek medicine, mostly herbs, and these clinics survive because they help some patients. Most Indians, however, regard these practitioners as quacks because these Greek medical houses are not known for rational medicine, nor are they part of an ongoing preventative, curative, and nursing care. Listen, if you want to get an ailment fixed, you could go on the internet right now and you can find someone that can tell you the most ridiculous thing. And depending on what you're in the mood for, you might do it. And you all know what I'm talking about. You see this, we call it bro science in the gym. Bro, what you got to do is drink a gallon of milk every day. It'll help you a lot. Unless you're lactose intolerant, but then you got to just push through it. Right? We see it. Like, again, some of you are into raw milk. Not going to get mad at you. Not going to say it's good or bad. I'm not, and don't get mad at me. Raw milk's great, but it also might kill you. Oh, no, it's because you don't know the cow. Like, fine, I don't even care. Drink it. I'm not against it. Just notice that the way we do this is all conspiratorial because we don't have a place where we can talk normally anymore. So everything's like, hey, I got access to a cow. You want some of this milk? So we're doing the ivermectin thing with raw milk all again. It's like, you want some milk? No? It's the milk lobby. And they're right in some ways. They're right. They're half right about some things and others. So think about this when it comes to medicine. And so what happens is these clinics exist because everyone's distrustful of the normal institutions. So Joey Bag of Donut witchcraft, medicine house can start off down the street. And we're like, maybe I'll go there because this other place won't see me. When they do see me, they won't give me medicine I know I need. And that's what's happening right now. So the rise of quackery is happening post-haste because, honestly, when one case, it's the worst thing ever. In some cases, it's the best. One thing we've learned through all of the COVID crap is that the elites can't be trusted. They don't know better than you. You are your own best advocate for things. But in any case, we see the medical knowledge in Greece did not produce a culture of care. This is the key. In fact, the wider culture overpowered and stifled the promising beginning of rational medicine. What we're going to notice in all this isn't that the medicine and the knowledge is the key, but that the culture of care is the key. So as Christians, if you get sucked into the politics of things, what you're going to find is an us against them mentality. The church is a place where the blue-haired abortionist can come in and they should be welcome. The person that's at the worst person, your enemy, should come in and be welcome. And then guess what? When they come in, if they accept Christ, they're your brother and sister in Christ. Amen. You embrace them. The communion table puts us together. It is the place where mercy reigns because justice came on the cross. And so when we think about that, the problem with the politics of things, it creates an us against them mentality. So the culture of care isn't seen in the church. Someone comes in the church, they see what? A culture of what? Well, I'm against those people. I'm like, no, I'm against the ideology and I'm going to stand against it. Amen. But someone comes in like, yeah, you come on in. You come right on in. Just like this, because this is the only hope for people. And the problem isn't their politics. Politics is the symptom. Their problem is they don't know Jesus Christ. And a lot of Christians don't know Jesus Christ. Christians. Which is why we vote the way we vote, why we act the way we act, why our apathy looks the way it looks. We go a little bit further. It says, during the early centuries of the Christian era, Greek doctors thronged to Rome. The most illustrious of these was Galen, whose works on medicine were translated into Arabic by Islamic scholars, such as Hunyan ibn Ishaq, who also translated works of Hippocrates and wrote commentaries on them. And Rome, however, did not contribute much to the theory or practice of medicine, except in matters of public health, in which it set a great example. Rome had an unrivaled water supply and public baths. It provided gymnasiums, domestic sanitation, adequate disposal of sewage, and even built some hospitals. Rome was way ahead of Gaza. After Rome's fall, learning was no longer held in high esteem. Experiment was discouraged, and originality became a dangerous asset. After Rome's fall. Again, I mentioned this before. We just got this thing come out. So do I think that big pharma is problematic? Yes. In what way? Every news story brought to you by Pfizer. I think that's a problem. Okay. But is the answer to say, well, big pharma, we need to make sure they don't make profits? Is the answer to give government more control of Pfizer? Think about how silly that is. What happens is right now, the big, this has happened months ago right now, but I think Biden signed this bill talking about making medicine cheaper in America. And people are like, I want medicine cheaper. Because all around the world, basically Americans are subsidizing it. Companies make money, and then Americans pay the most for that medicine. And we say, that's not fair that you could go to Switzerland and pay less than America. That's not fair that I could get the same medicine like Americans are making. Now, that's true. The answer is those other countries that are basically limiting the profits these companies can make, they're the problem. But the fact that they're making a profit on Americans, now keep on, I want to pay less for medicine. However, the incentive that allows these companies to make the medicines that they do and do the research they do is an incentive structure that allows them to make profits. If you take away the incentive structure, you know what you get? You get cheaper medicine. You know what else you get? No other medicine. Cancer research, can't do it. This research can't do it. Like all the profits come out because all of a sudden we all become, so the argument was, let's not make it so everyone pays more and they make profits places. Let's just make it so everyone else has a crappy system. Let's just make ours crappy too. So we'll all be equally poor. That's what Marxism does. It makes everyone equally poor. And so this idea, the Christian idea of picturing that after Rome's fall, learning was no longer held in high esteem. We're finding these kinds of things happening too. Experiment was discouraged. Why? It's heresy. And originality became a dangerous asset. The ability was there, but the culture of care could not become part of the classical world. The Roman Empire built a culture of cruelty that killed for entertainment. For example, exposing unwanted infants had become a common practice for centuries before Rome fell. Greek writers Plato and Aristotle had both recommended infanticide as legitimate state policy. We heard this in our nation right now. We heard people talk about the economy. Abortion's good for the economy, they said. Google it. The 12 Tables, the earliest known Roman legal code, permitted fathers to expose any female infants to the elements, as well as deformed or weak male infants. During excavations of a villa in the port of Ashkelon, Lawrence E. Steger and his colleagues made a gruesome discovery in the sewer that ran under the bathhouse. The sewer had been clogged with refuse sometime in the 6th century AD. When we excavated and dry sieved the desiccated sewage, we found numerous small bones that we assumed were animal bones. Only later did we learn that there were human bones, nearly 100 little babies apparently murdered and thrown into the sewer. Now, if that makes you grossed out, what happens after abortions is we just throw them into the dumpster. And so there's a book, I forget what it's called right now, about Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, how one of the doctors went out and got to basically grabbed one of these bags. And it just really broke open for a lot of people. We throw the babies. If you saw it, it's body parts. And we just throw them in the garbage. All the ancient world was not selfish and pleasure-seeking, though. Many thought that renouncing the world and its pleasures was high and desirable idea. So instead of just saying, hey, the world's a problem, they say, well, no, the world is the problem. Let's just become monastic, in other words, right? What they lacked was the knowledge that God loved this sinful, rebellious world full of sickness and suffering. He loved it enough to send his son to suffer in order to save others. So again, the answer when we see that, hey, this world is getting worse, isn't to move away somewhere where it seems less worse. Now, if you did that, I get it. I'm not mad at you, but that's not the answer. The answer is to recognize that Jesus loved people in this world, in this terrible place. That's the missionary call. Jesus Christ was born when Emperor Augustus was self-consciously building what he thought would be the secure foundations of civilization. There would be one empire and one emperor. Wars would cease. The world would be safe for civilization. Napoleon said the same thing. Literally. His problem was that this empire had to be built by force, which required a brutal army. But then the army had to be kept in check by force. Building an empire by force turned citizens into virtual slaves. The entire system had to be built on the backs of sweating, bleeding slaves who had no stake in it. The empire was good for the privileged few. For the rest, it was so horrible, a civilization that Jesus' compassion was seen as radical light in the dark ages. Let me just give you something very controversial to say. Our American foreign policy is based on the fact that it's secular and divorced from knowing Christ. American foreign policy should, if anything, encourage Christians to be missionaries because that's the best change agent in these countries we go into. We want to bring them democracy, but there's no such thing as a democracy that's going to thrive and create the culture we have without the Bible. And so what happens is we're going to keep the peace in the world by force. And I'm not against the idea of force. It's the world that we know it, but we enjoy that. And the rest of the world can enjoy that. We'll enjoy it as long as they go with their thing, but it's not changing hearts. That's why we didn't build a thriving democracy in Iraq after Saddam Hussein happened. That's right. That's why you cannot just say, well, let's just let Hamas stay in power and they're going to build a thriving place. Their worldview is the problem. And that's kind of the issue that you had with Augustus and the rest. People's worldview was the problem. And so that's the cultures they build. Ask yourself, when you look at the politics of today, what kind of culture are we building when everything has to be done by force? We have a divided nation, and then everything we want to get is to force other people to do it. Christ attracted the oppressed masses, and he talks to, this whole thing goes into Jesus' impact, and we teach this, and he talks to lepers, the untouchables, and Samaritans, but Christ's brilliant apologist, Justin Martyr, was converted in AD 133. In his apology, Martyr explained that Jesus renounced the prestige that could have come from seeking the patronage of classical civilization. So in other words, Jesus wasn't just like, man, I'm awesome, look at this palace I can have. That was like the temptation in the desert, where Satan's like, look, I can give you the kingdoms of the world, and he said no. Instead, he became the Messiah of the sick, the sorrowing, the suffering. It was this that transformed his persecuted community. And so really it's the love of enemies that he talks about. It's the downtrodden and whatnot. The challenge for the ministry of Christ, one of the problems that even in this author, what he makes is that we live in an affluent society. When we think of the downtrodden, we think of, drug addicts and homeless people and things I get it. But the message of Jesus isn't just that he went to homeless people or that he went to lepers, he went to sick people. It was that everyone's a leper. And so the message of him touching the leper isn't, I uniquely think Christians should start ministries for lepers, which, great, do that. But the message of Jesus touching the untouchables was to show us that he says, I didn't come for the righteous, I came for those that are sick. And so the Pharisees were like, are you saying that we're blind? And he goes, because you say you see, there's no hope. Like, what's worse than a blind man when Jesus is standing there? Well, Jesus can heal your blindness. What's worse is being blind and pretending to see. That's self-righteousness. And so the gospel message is not merely that we should help the poor and the destitute. Fine. I would say for us as Christians, we should see them as people made in God's image, just like us, as human beings. That's why we help them. But the message of helping the poor is also that that's who you are without Christ, and that we need him. We're reliant upon him to help us. Anyways, I just want to make sure I don't miss that. The Christian church has not always lived by these high ideals. Again, one more last thing. Jesus ate with Pharisees also, and tax collectors also, right? I mean, we see both type of things here. I say this simply because I ministered in an affluent area. And so I remember when we first started our church, and people are like, why are you going to start a church right there? I'm like, well, rich people need Jesus too. It's a true story. Now, yes, I like poor people too. And so there's lots of poor people here. We got a lot of them. You're welcome. All poor people are welcome too. But the point, it has nothing to do with economy, I guess is my point. We need Jesus. Everyone needs Jesus, okay? But we see earlier the Christian church had not always lived at the high ideals. At one point, Emperor Julian inadvertently confirmed the essential validity of Justin's claim. However, when he tried to save Rome's pagan religion by persecuting Christians, that's what he tried to do. So he told his co-religionists that if they really wanted to prevent Christianity's growth, they'd have to serve their neighbors better than the Christians did. I love that. He's like, we got to defeat Christianity, so we got to make sure we serve our neighbors better than they do. One hears similar statements from the militant Hindus today who hate Christian missions yet challenge each other to serve like Christians in order to prevent people from becoming followers of Christ. Augustine, Bishop Hippo, explained the difference between Rome's kingdom of men and Christ's kingdom of God. He was a professor of rhetoric whose book City of God and Confessions dominated the intellectual life of Europe for more than 1,000 years. That's a big deal. His mother was a Christian, but he ridiculed Christianity because he was a learned philosopher and because his playboy culture. For example, did you know that Augustine kept a mistress since he was 15 years old? It's helpful. By the way, that's the same Augustine who said his worst sin was stealing a pear from his neighbor's thing. Like, I think the mistress thing might be a thing. His contempt for Christianity continued until the age of 30, when Augustine realized that philosophy had failed both him and the ancient world. In his book on Nature and Grace, he describes the two cultures, the secular and the celestial, as he calls it. He says, that which animates secular society, and this is what I'm going to call paganism. Let me say it another way. That which animates the society that is now trying to rule and reign over everything that happens, the thing that animates it, that pushes it, is the love of self to the point of contempt for God. This was written a long time ago, and we're the generation that invented the selfie. That which animates divine society is the love of God to the point of contempt for self. Years ago, I taught this definition of worship. Worship is ascribing worth to God. It's worthship. And a Christian is marked. Like, how do we aim our life? I've talked about this before, and someone recently posted a clip of something I said, and I'm like, I remember saying that. That was a good thing. I'm going to say it again. Worship is giving worth to God in what we do. And as Christians, what do we see in 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians a couple times now, we see Paul say, do everything you do for the glory of God. Everything you do for the glory of God. In other words, do everything you do as worship. What does that mean? So if our normal stuff, everyone worships. So the normal culture, the pagan culture, does everything they do to worship God. The problem is the God they worship is self. That's the whole point of the self. That's the picture. The Christian does not deny self as like, I'm against self, that's bad. The focus seems to just be different. So in other words, to worship God is to say this. The aim, if we're supposed to worship God in everything we do, the aim of my blank is not blank. It is worship. The glory of God. Okay? What do I mean by this? This is how the Christian lives differently. The aim of my marriage is not happiness. It's not even holiness. The aim of my whatever it is the glory of God. The aim of my schooling is not an education. It is the glory of God. And when you seek first the kingdom of heaven, all these things are added unto you. So this is the Christian aim. Now the culture's aim is, this is the Christian aim, right? This is Christian. Okay? This is the world. The aim that says the same thing, but instead of this one, so I'll call this Christian. Sorry. This so you can see it. This is such a good picture. I'm going to call this Christian, so I have to rewrite it. So the aim of my blank is not blank. It's this. The Christian view says the worship of God. The world says is worship the glory of self. So this is what everyone else says. The aim of my college is not college, it's the worship of self, which is why you go to college to be indoctrinated into your pronouns or to whatever it is. Like that's kind of the point, right? This is the two views. This is like, you want a happy marriage? Then worship God in your marriage. Right? Like that's what we're saying. You want to enjoy your job more? You go there to worship God, right? What are we doing right now? Do you want to learn stuff? You'll learn stuff. But if the aim of learning stuff is to do what? You could learn everything you're learning tonight and be in sin. And sometimes it's a sin to get an A, even in a theology class. If the goal of that A is your glory, if the goal of that A is to know information that you can lord over the people at work, be like, what I know, and then you just use words. If that's your goal, you could take good things and make it sinful, right? But if the aim is worship, what are we doing here? We are worshiping the Lord Jesus Christ with all of our minds right now. And what's the byproduct of it? We're going to know stuff. But the aim of what we do is worship. That's the difference in the two cultures of the world. When everyone says they want purpose, the world's constantly offering them purpose, self, the worship of self. If the church only does its sermons focused on self, how are we different? If we do sermon series on how you can be rich or how God wants to bless your dreams, it's doing the same thing the world's doing. The aim of everything you do, even in the church and even in your singing, is yourself. If all of our songs are how I am, like you might say biblical things about self. I call that the narcissism, right? We see Stephen Furtick do this all the time, right? You take the story of David, you take the story of things, and what are the giants in your life? And God wants him. Like, what is that even about? You could do that with Winnie the Pooh. Watch out, there's bees by the honey. What's the honey pot that you need? Where are the bees? You could do the same thing. But I love this. Augustine essentially rejected Roman civilization, which was characterized by self-love. He rejected it. The answer is not to say, I'm just a wretch. Well, if you're just a wretch, then you made Christ an idiot. Yes, he died for wretches like us, but sometimes we overplay that. We're made in the image of God. The very idea that God's mad at us tells us we have value. Are you mad at an eagle for killing a dove? Do we try it? Do we put on trial? Do we put a monkey on trial for rape? Oh, I saw you hold that. We were at the zoo. We go to the zoo every Wednesday. You're all welcome to come. Have you ever seen ducks mate? It is gnarly. It's like a gang of them. And our kids were walking by, and these ducks come down. They're attacking each other and holding one down. The other one's coming like, and someone tried to chase them, like, oh, they're attacking the duck. Like, they're not attacking that duck. Should we say, listen, we need to give this duck some re-education, right? Why? Because it's a duck. We don't even care. But people can't act that way because they have value. The very thing that makes our sin sinful is we have value. Right? So understand that saying self, like the opposite of self-love, is not self-loathing. It's love for God. Self-love is an assumed trait. The Christian answer can't be self-loathing. That doesn't attract anything. The whole point is love for God. Is what we were made for, is to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's worship. In any case, the philosophy of self-love began with the assertion of the animal right to live and find fulfillment and satisfaction of its belly. But then he says this creates a community, but that was a community espoused by thieves and pirates. The phenomenon seen today among corrupt officials of democratic state, it's the lowest kind of cooperative endeavor. In other words, everyone works together to make sure they all get theirs. By the way, most of our marriages today are built on this. Most of our sexual unions are built on this. We use words like satisfaction and this and that. None of that is in the Bible. We give, we sacrifice. That's our job because we're already satisfied by Christ, by God. What kind of love would it look like if you actually believed God actually loved you and you actually were satisfied in his love for you? What might it look like when you actually then loved your spouse without needing them to return it? That might actually let you love unlovable people, including the ones you're married to, including the ones that you're related to, including your coworkers. But I digress. Corrupt officers of a hospital or police may have such a strong brotherhood that no one blows the whistle against their foul play. That's what's happening right now. Theirs is a self-centered community. It covers up each other's crookedness. So, we see that. So it matters not whether a corrupt medical community has taken the Hippocratic Oath. It would earn the hatred of its beneficiaries were it to follow the self-love-driven culture of the secular city. Romans rejected Rome's culture because Christ confronted its cruelties with the gospel of a compassionate God. If we expect anyone to reject this culture right now, We need to make sure we confront the cruelties we see, not with our politics, but with the gospel. With the gospel. That is the answer, is the gospel. As we go forward, we realize this. We see monasteries were real pioneers of Western culture of care. Hermits and ascetics had perceived the monks, but they saw spirituality as a renunciation of the world, not too different from the Hindu aesthetics. Saint Benedict of Nursia rejected the Hermetic tradition of monks, withdrawing from society to cultivate their own spirituality. Realizing that God loved this world, he practiced a celibate spiritual life, not for its own sake, but to serve society, and especially the poor and sick. The Benedictine monks imprinted on the Western consciousness the idea of humility and service as the true means of greatness. This idea became a defining feature of Western civilization. What is service? It is the opposite of the Asian idea that lesser beings must serve the greater. So what's interesting in our culture, think about politics right now. All of our politicians are rich. How'd that happen? How'd they make their money? True story. Yeah, they make a big salary, but not what they're worth. If a politician's become, I mean, just being honest, I'm not saying you can't make money and you can't do it, but like, what kind of society is it when all the politicians like, look how rich they are? What are you selling? And who's benefiting? Who are you serving? The idea that a public servant is what we call people in office, that came from the Christian idea that public servants, people in power,